Welcome, everybody. My name is Aaron Nelson. I'm the president of the Chamber for Greater Chapel Hill-Carrboro, and we are very excited to have you with us today. This is an all-business briefing on the North Carolina Department of Revenue's Business Recovery Grant Program. It is an important grant program. We've sent you some pre-information that'll make grants of up to $500,000 available to eligible businesses, and that the application deadline, y'all, is just 1 week away. We'll hear from Will, but what's exciting for me about this is that it is, I won't call it a guarantee issue, but for qualified businesses, it's not competitive. All businesses that qualify, we hope we'll be able to get some funds. We'll ask Will to talk a little bit more about that in detail. We have 1 hour dedicated to help you all on this, and we want to make sure that we get time to answer your questions. So for flow, we're going to give our guest speaker from the North Carolina Department of Revenue 10 to 15 minutes to walk through an overview of the grant program. And then the balance of the time is yours, y'all. And we are going to make sure that we get all your questions answered. So please stay muted during the presentation, but feel free to drop your questions in the chat as that presentation unfolds. We'll track them. But after the presentation, we are going to transfer right into a Q&A. You'll be able to ask your question directly. We'll read the ones that were in the chat. You can put your hand up or send us a message that you'd like us to call on you, and we'll make sure that you get to ask your question directly. You can do it orally or you can drop it in the chat. Sound good to everybody? If so, let's get to it. So first, I'd like to acknowledge our co-hosts and co-sponsors for today's briefing. Our region is stronger when we cooperate and work well together to share information with our business community. So we're excited to be joined by the Chatham County Chamber of Commerce and the Greater Durham Chamber of Commerce. I've asked both chambers to bring a 1-minute welcome. First up is Cindy Poindexter. She is the president and CEO of the Chatham Chamber. Cindy, welcome.
Thanks, Aaron. I just want to say a brief welcome to all of you all for coming to this important meeting. I hope it'll be very beneficial to you. I hope that you are able to receive funds from applying for the grant. It has been a hard couple of 2 years, and we wish you all the best of luck. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Cindy, thank you for the great job that you have done for your chamber over the last many years. You've been a wonderful partner for a long time. Some of you may or may not know, at the beginning of the pandemic, the Economic Development Partners of Orange and Chatham County met every single day for nearly a year to talk about our local economy and how we could best be supporting our local businesses. And Cindy was there all the time, and it's a wonderful partnership. We're grateful for her. Thanks for sending out all the messaging on it. Next up is Brian Fox. Brian is the Vice President for Public Policy for the Durham Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Durham Chamber of Commerce. We also may be joined by Jeff Durham, who is the CEO. Brian or Jeff?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'll just say on Jeff's behalf and our board of directors and all of our members, thank you to Aaron, to Cindy, and to everyone here, Katie and the teams, for the great partnership. We certainly are a region first, and we are honored to do all this work with such great partners. So I'll get out of the way and on to the exciting presentation that we're about to hear.
Thank you, Brian. We have a great cooperative relationship to not only to the south with Chatham, Orange and Chatham, but also here, all of us representing the Western Triangle. Both Jeff Durham and I have regular communication about how we can cooperate to serve and support the businesses of our community. Brian's been a tremendous partner working with Katie and I and Jeff. The economic development partners from across the region get together on a monthly basis to talk about our economy, and particularly COVID and COVID response. So thank you, Brian, and thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Katie Luvis, who is our Vice President for External Affairs, for organizing today's meeting. It's my pleasure now to introduce our speaker. This is Will Futrell. Will is the Strategic Planning and Public Engagement Officer for the North Carolina Department of Revenue and is the lead liaison for this grant program. If I understand it correctly, Will is a UNC grad armed with a law degree from Campbell University and has worked all over, including in the U.S. Congress and Senate, in the North Carolina General Assembly, as a campaign manager with a law firm in the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and now he's with the North Carolina Department of Revenue. Clearly, he has some hustle. We're grateful to have him here with us today. Well, we so appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule today to brief us up and to help our local employers get the questions that they want answered. So welcome, and Will, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Aaron, and thank y'all, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with y'all today about this really important program that we hope makes a difference in some business owners' lives. It has been a rough 2 years for everybody, but especially business owners. As Aaron said, I'm Will Futrell. I'm the Strategic Planning Public Engagement Officer at NCDOR, and I'll just go ahead and just dive on in. Today, we're going to discuss what the Business Recovery Program actually is. I'll go over the eligibility requirements and walk you through the application process. And as I mentioned at the end, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this meeting is that the deadline to apply is in 1 week. So you have seven days to get all your necessary documents and information together and to get your application to us, because it is important that you know that to be eligible, the department must have received your application on or before January 31st. It's not one of those situations where if it's postmarked before January 31st, we must have received your application on or before that date. So the Business Recovery Grant Program was enacted in the budget passed by the General Assembly and signed by Governor Cooper in November last year. It provides one-time grant payments to aid North Carolina businesses that suffered substantial economic damage from the COVID-19 pandemic. The program created two types of grants, the hospitality grant and the reimbursement grant, to help cover a percentage of an eligible business's economic loss due to the pandemic, with a maximum grant payment of $500,000. The department opened the application period for the program on December 16th, 2021, and the deadline to apply is January 31st, 2022. So let's talk about the eligibility requirements for each of the grants, starting with the hospitality grant. The program authorized nearly $300 million for hospitality grant awards to eligible businesses. And a business is eligible for a hospitality grant if it meets all of the following conditions. The business is classified in the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS, code 71 or 72. And what these codes include, they include businesses primarily engaged in the accommodation, food services, arts, entertainment, and recreation industries. The second requirement is that the business must have suffered an economic loss of at least 20% during the defined COVID period, and we'll talk more on that later. And finally, the business must be subject to North Carolina income tax imposed by Article 4 of Chapter 105 of our general statutes. And in general, Article 4 covers corporate income tax, individual income tax, and partnership income tax. And so these are the eligibility requirements for the hospitality grant. The eligibility requirements for the reimbursement grant are slightly different, but extremely important. So let's go over those now. The program allotted $200 million for reimbursement grants. And the purpose of reimbursement grant was to provide financial aid to businesses suffering because of the pandemic, but weren't able to take advantage of some of the previously enacted federal relief programs. To qualify for a reimbursement grant, a business must meet all of the following conditions. The business is not classified in NAICS code 71 or 72. So essentially this means any other type of business. The next two requirements are the same as those for the hospitality grants. The business must have suffered an economic loss of at least 20%, and the business must be subject to North Carolina income tax. And finally, the business cannot have received money, a loan, an advance, a grant, or any other consideration for many of these federal programs listed on the screen. So let's focus on the 20% economic loss requirement. So because this program is intended to aid businesses that have suffered economically due to the pandemic, the legislation defined how to calculate a business's economic loss. And Economic loss is going to be based on the amount your gross receipts in North Carolina were reduced between what they defined as the pre-COVID period, which is March 1st, 2019 through February 29th, 2020, and the COVID period, which is March 1st, 2020 through February 28th, 2021. So in order to calculate your economic loss, you'll need to first determine your gross receipts. For most applicants, gross receipts are those reported on line 1 of Form E-500, your North Carolina sales and use tax return. However, if the applicant did not report gross receipts on line 1 of Form E-500, gross receipts are the sum of the receipts reported on lines 4 through 8 of Form E-500. Now, if you're a partnership that filed a federal Form 1065, a U.S. partnership return of income, you may also include gross receipts reported on line 1A of Form 1065, as long as they meet both of the following criteria. The gross receipts were not reported on your Form E-500, and the receipts are for transactions apportioned to North Carolina. So now that you know you're eligible for a grant, how much could you receive? Your award amount is going to depend on which grant bucket you fall into. Now, remember, all grant payments for this program are capped at $500,000. If you're eligible for the hospitality grant and you have not previously received an award from any of the federal programs listed on the slide, then you may receive a grant of up to 20% of your economic loss. However, if you did receive an award amount from any of those programs, then you may receive a hospitality grant of up to 10%. Your economic loss. And if you're eligible for the reimbursement grant, you may receive a grant up to 20% of your economic loss. But remember that to be eligible for the reimbursement grant, you cannot have previously received any award amount from any of those federal programs listed on the slide. So if the total amount of grant awards exceeds the funds authorized for the program, grants are going to be reduced in the order established by law. So a business's actual grant amount will not be able to be determined until all eligible applications are received. And after the department has received all eligible applications, we'll make all payments by check and mail them to the address provided by the business on the application. Now, a key thing here I want to note is if you have a few options to apply for the grant. You can submit an electronic application, which we highly encourage, and I'll go more into detail on that in a bit. But you can also mail a paper application, fax an application, or deliver an application to one of our service centers. But if you're mailing an application, it's crucial that you mail it to the correct address, which is listed on the screen here. However, since we are 7 days away, I highly encourage you to utilize one of the other methods of applying. But at the end of the application period, you're going to be able to find updated payment distribution information on our website under the payments tab of our business recovery grant webpage. So like I said, we highly encourage you to submit an electronic application because it comes with a lot of benefits. Like you'll get a email confirmation that the department has received your application, so you won't have to worry. You won't have to worry about whether or not we've actually gotten the application. You'll have your economic loss computed for you, and you're going to have checkpoints to ensure that you've completed all the required fields of the application before submitting. So let's take a better look at what the application process looks like via electronic submission. Before you sit down to apply, you're going to need to gather the information needed to fill out the application, and that's going to include your business's demographic information, which might include your federal ID number or your FEIN, or if you're a sole proprietorship, your social security number. And if you have a North Carolina sales and use tax account ID, you'll need to include that. And if you have multiple tax account IDs, you'll need to include the additional ones as well. You'll need your NAICS number. You're going to need your gross receipts for the pre-COVID and COVID period. Like I said, those are the gross receipts you reported on line 1 of Form E-500, or the sum of the gross receipts on lines 4 through 8 of Form E-500. And also, if you're a partnership, it's going to be the gross receipts reported on Federal Form 1065. So in part 1 of the application, you're going to enter in your business information, starting with your structural type. And once that's been selected from the drop-down menu, the required fields are going to display with information needed for your designated structure. And here, just to note, if you're using the electronic application, right here is where you'll find a link to your form instructions. And so this is important, especially if you are a quarterly or monthly filer. We have specific instructions for those types of filers to calculate their gross receipts, because we know that the quarterly and monthly filers, the windows for their gross receipts aren't going to perfectly match up with the defined COVID periods. So make sure that you read those instructions before applying. Part 2 covers the eligibility requirements I discussed at the beginning of the presentation, and you'll be answering yes or no to 3 questions. And since not every business will meet the requirement of obtaining a sales and use account ID, if your business is utilizing your gross receipts from your previously filed sales and use tax return, you're going to be entering information on fields 4 and 7. And note that you'll be required to provide a sales and use tax account ID if the values entered on lines 4 or 7 is greater than 0. Now, if your business is utilizing information from your partnership return, you'll need to answer fields 5 and 8. And once you've entered in those figures, you're going to have fields 6, 9, 10, and 11 automatically computed for you. Part 4 is where you'll attach any necessary documentation based on what information you provide in the application. You might attach page 1 of your Form 1065, any additional NC sales and use tax account IDs, and supporting documentation if you're submitting an amended application. And finally, in part 5, you'll sign and date the application, and after you've reviewed it one last time, submit it to the department by selecting finish. And once you do that, you'll have the opportunity to print out your completed application. You also, in your email confirmation that we've received your application, you'll be able to view the completed document there. So what do you do if after submitting your application, you realize that you made a mistake or you have any other issues with what you originally applied for? You'll need to submit an amended application, which the department must receive on or before the January 31st deadline. And you'll file an amended application as though the original one wasn't filed. You'll simply open up an electronic application, and in the top right-hand corner, select amended application on the screen. And I do want to just share with you some common questions we've gotten since we launched the program. The first one is, I've not filed an E-500 sales and use tax return during the COVID period. What should I do? You should file and pay the E-500 for the missing period. You must include the gross receipts that will be reported on line 1 of the E-500 when calculating your gross receipts for the COVID period. The second question is, if a business is not a partnership for federal income tax purposes and does not have an NC sales and use tax ID, is the business eligible for a grant payment? Unfortunately, no. If the business is not a partnership for federal income tax purposes and does not have an NC sales and use tax ID, the business will not be eligible for a grant payment. And finally, when's the last day you can submit your application for a grant? It's going to be January 31st. So you must submit an electronic application on or before that date. Any application submitted by fax, mail, or delivered to a service center must be received by the department on or before January 31st.
Mr. Fitzgerald, before you move off of, will you go back one slide, please? Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
No, right where you were.
Look.
Those, thank you. On that first one, will you remind everybody what the COVID period is again?
Right. So the COVID period is March 1st, 2020 through February 28th, 2021.
So the calendar year running the beginning of March 2020, that's the COVID period. And then they're comparing that with pre-COVID period, and that is
March 1st, 2019 through February 29th, 2020.
All right, on that question 2 in the darker blue, if a business is not a partnership, do you mean and does not, or do you mean or? If you're neither a partnership, nor did you file taxes, but if you are not a partnership, but did file taxes, you are eligible.
So to sort of go into that question in more detail, if you do not file a Form E-500, your sales and use tax return, your North Carolina sales and use tax return, or Form 1065, you will not be able to compute your gross receipts.
One or the other. It's one or the other, but not both.
Right, right.
So if you're not a partnership for tax purposes, or don't have, or you and don't have that.
Yeah, because if you're a partnership for federal income tax purposes, you're going to be filing that Form 1065.
Perfect.
And if you have a sales and use tax account ID, you're going to be filing that Form E-500. So if you're not able to compute, if you're not either of those, you won't be able to have your gross receipts on those forms.
Thank you for letting me interrupt you. I'm sorry to have done.
No,
so.
I'm happy to, because that's often that's a common question we got. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that. I know I've just breezed through a lot of information. So if after the Q&A you have any more questions about the process, or if you just want to dive into more of the technical details, please go to our webpage, which has a ton of helpful information. It's where you'll also access the electronic application, and you can also take advantage of we've compiled a list of frequently asked questions. And also we've created a helpline with dedicated staff to answer questions specifically on this program. And so if you need some, there are going to be a lot of situations that are fact specific that I might not be able to answer in this kind of setting. So I would encourage you to call that number listed on the screen, and we'll have one of our agents will be able to walk through your specific question that's relevant to your specific fact pattern. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or cover anything else in more detail.
Well, let me thank you all. We've worked on different grants over the course of this COVID. The Department of Revenue created one of the simplest applications I've ever seen. It is, y'all, if you're afraid of it, don't be afraid of it. It is one page. And it is one page. And if you do it online, it auto-populates. You do have to gather a little bit of information. How about, do you want to leave this screen up, or should you, if you would like to, we'll drop I dropped a link into the chat so that folks can go to this website. I'll leave this up for a little while longer for folks to write down that number. But Katie, do you want to ask out loud the first question that you saw there?
Yeah, Will, great job. We have about half a dozen questions in the chat right now. We'll probably get some more. And several of them, I believe you've answered, but out of respect to our listeners, I think we should raise each one. And that way, if they have something granular, they can open up their mic and have a follow-up. So I'm going to start with John Rice's question. John said, what if we spent the time between those dates attempting to get the business open and were unable to get the business open before 2021?
Okay, that's a good question. And so with that, I'm going to go back to my slides with the COVID period and pre-COVID period dates.
Mr. Rice, can you also clarify, like, didn't get it open and it had never been open before? Or do you mean that it was open, you closed it, and we're trying to reopen it and weren't able to? Let's answer for both. If he never opened, he says it's a new business, it's never been opened before.
Right. So if your business opened during the pre-COVID period, so in between that March 1st, 2019 through February 29th, 2020 window, you can still apply for the grant. However, if you opened, let's say in December of 2019, it's unlikely, but not impossible, that you're going to have the gross receipts necessary to meet that 20% economic loss threshold. But so it's like I said, it's like if you open in the later half of 2019, it's unlikely, but again, not impossible. And we have seen scenarios where that they have been able to reach the 20% economic loss threshold. However, if you opened after February 29th, 2020, you are not going to be eligible for the program because you're not going to have gross receipts for the pre-COVID period.
I encourage somebody who is just starting an enterprise to take a look at what there's going to be some startup funds that the town of Chapel Hill has made available for Chapel Hill-based businesses. There may be some new funds to help with startup, and then both Orange County and Carrboro have had some funds to help existing enterprises. Sorry, Katie, will you ask the second question?
Sure. And John Rice did just drop in the chat. He said it is a new business, never opened before. So it sounds like that he would be ineligible. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm moving right along then. Josh Lazoff asked, our business does not file an E500, so I'm waiting to ask what forms we should use to calculate loss.
So the statute requires you to calculate your gross receipts on either your Form E500 or your federal Form 1065. So if you don't have either of those forms, you're not going to be eligible for the grant because you're not going to be able to calculate your gross receipts from those forms. And that's, you know, I know it's an unfortunate answer for many, and but that's just, we have to follow what the legislation sets out as far as eligibility requirements.
So can I ask a follow-up to that?
Please.
Yeah.
So that's surprising and unfortunate, because I don't know any arts organization that files an E500. You know, we're all performing artists and we provide services and not goods. And so my accountant, well, I won't tell you the words that she said for a grant that is supposed to be for performing artists, but requires an E500, because that's excluding just about everybody in that category who provides services as a performing arts organization. So she assumed that you would accept the first couple of pages of the 1120S, but that you're saying that's not the case. That's what she said. She was sure you guys would be accepting in its place.
Yes, the statute only allows for gross receipts from your Form E500 and your Form 1065, unfortunately.
Okay, so it's not for performing arts organizations that classify under that 71 code in North Carolina that pay sales tax like the grant says it's for.
Josh, if you'd like let's use the Art Center in Carrboro. They pay sales tax on the tickets that they sell. I think you have to pay sales tax on tickets that are sold, or if you sold pottery. But you're right. We have been really unhappy to learn this also, that if you sold a good, then you would have collected sales tax. But if people pay you to perform, then you would have never filed a sales tax, and that you've had revenue and you lost it, and this excludes you.
Okay.
Okay. We are similarly frustrated. Will, any recommendation for him on this?
I wish we could get this money out to every single person, but our hands are tied with how the law was written, establishing the program. So, but yes, that is a common question we've got, and we do share your concern.
Katie.
Thanks, Josh. There is a comment or question from Frigor, and it says, hello, and thank you for putting this briefing together. I applied for the grant, but haven't received an approval. I'm guessing the delay is because the sales and use paperwork was in a different business name. This is so because we purchased the business August of 2019 and closed just before the COVID shutdowns. My question with this transition in businesses, how do we go about proving our eligibility and getting approved for this grant?
I would say with that question, that'd be a perfect question to utilize our helpline number on, because our agents on that helpline will have that documentation, and especially since you've already submitted an application, they'll be able to review that with you and make sure that you get all your questions answered for that.
And for clarity, though, just so you know, nobody has received, it isn't held up because of that. They're waiting until January 31st before even considering anybody. So nobody was here prior to January 31st. So if you submitted and heard nothing, that doesn't mean that you're not being seen favorably.
Right. Absolutely. If an application received by the department on January 31st is going to be in the same pool as an application received on December 16th.
Katie?
Yeah, I actually have a personal follow-up on that one, Will. So if someone, say, submitted their application in early January and they're just waiting for the program to then start reviewing, will they get any sort of notification that their application was received and deemed complete? Or are they literally just going to wait and see?
Now, if you submit an electronic application, you should have received an email saying that we've received your application. But if you did not submit electronically or did not receive that email, I would highly encourage you to immediately call our helpline. Because especially if even if you've submitted one in paper, you can call, or if you mail one paper, you can call and make sure that we have it in our system. We don't want anyone sitting there worrying whether their application's in limbo somewhere.
Great. So Frigor, if you're still on the line, please feel free to open your mic if you have a follow-up. Otherwise, I will move us along. All right, moving along. Carson said he's in a similar place as Josh about the arts question. They're a service-based business and then therefore don't have sales and use. So several people are feeling that pain.
Yes.
Carson was wondering if there are any other ways to calculate based on other tax forms. I think we already answered that, but
unfortunately, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't shoot the messenger, please.
All right. Well, Emily said, what if you're a new company that started during the pandemic that is yet to file an E500 because this will be the first year we need to do so? I think you've already addressed this, but maybe you could just give Emily a chance here with a response.
Yes. So with that scenario, I think that falls under one of the questions I put at the end. If you have not filed your E500 during the COVID period, but from what I'm hearing from the question is that you weren't required to file the return for that period in the first place. Again, that would be a question because that is a very fact-specific scenario that you're in. I would encourage you to call our helpline. And I'm not trying to just push everyone off to the helpline, but these are our subject matter experts that can answer these questions and go over your specific fact pattern. In a situation like this, I don't want to give one answer to one very, very specific scenario and that be misconstrued for another situation. But they will, and also by calling that helpline, we have access to our database and are able to review that with you as well.
Great. So Emily, if you're out there and you have a follow-up question, please feel free to open your mic and ask it. Otherwise, I'm going to move us along. All right. And just a reminder, we've got Will for another 20 minutes. So don't hesitate. If you've got a question, please drop it in the chat. And also you may raise your hand, and I'm going to go through a few more questions here in the chat. Christopher Murray asked if the application was sent via fax, is there a way to get a confirmation that the application made it to the right people?
Call our helpline.
Great. And Scott Maitland's and the Maitland Law Firm acknowledged great webinar. So Will, thank you. You're doing great.
Thank you. It's not often that the Department of Revenue gets compliments, so I'll take what I can get.
Okay, Sosha said she or he had a similar issue. Their business could not open when they intended to. Their plan was spring of 2020. They ultimately opened in September of 2020, leaving them with a total lapse of income and zero eligibility for any of the COVID relief funds, but certainly negatively impacted by the pandemic. It seems there's no way for a business to get any assistance. What's your advice for them?
All I can say is, I'm sorry that you don't apply or aren't eligible for this grant. And, I do, as much as these programs are designed to help every business, I hate that to hear about stories about people still falling through the cracks.
Mhm.
Let me, my color commentary on the edges of that is for, if you're in Orange County, there is a quarterly Orange County Business Grant Program, and you do not have to have existed pre-COVID. In Carrboro, they may be adding additional funds to the grant program that they just did. Again, do not have to exist pre-COVID. Chapel Hill, the same. There's about, there are some funds remaining from the last round. I don't, if someone is here from Durham and wants to comment in Chatham County, Cindy, if you wanted to comment, I believe there's both a backstop program with a loan guarantee, as well as some small business funding that may not require that you existed pre-COVID. But we are seeing from state and federal is about supporting those that were damaged. And regrettably, if you didn't exist, they have been excluding you from the programs.
Thanks, Aaron. And I'll just follow up on that. Like, since, while this is a statewide program, I would, just piggyback on what you said. I would follow up with, your local governments. A lot of them. That's where we're seeing a lot of, attempts to catch those people who are falling through the cracks as far as statewide and federal programs are going.
Katie, is there a question from Charlie? Or you may not be there yet.
Yep, I see it. So just a reminder to everyone, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. And there's some people who joined late, so there could be questions that have already been asked and answered, but asked again. And to respect everyone, I suggest we just go ahead and keep answering them, Will. So Charlie asked, are S Corps excluded for some reason? Sorry if you already answered, I just joined.
So for S Corps, let me pull up. I think we've gotten that question before. So any business structural type, as long as it's subject to North Carolina income tax, is eligible, as long as those gross receipts are reported from the E500 lines 4 and 7, and you've met the economic loss requirement.
Charlie, I think unless you had incorporated your business in Delaware, if you are paying North Carolina income tax, which likely you are, and paying sales tax in North Carolina, irrespective of you could be a 501c3, an LLC, a C6, S Corp, C Corp. I think we're all of those are okay. Did you just unmute to ask it more directly? Are you there, Charlie?
Yeah, just because, and my thing in there was because since it's an S Corp, the business doesn't pay the income tax. It all flows through and we pay it personally. So tax is paid, but it's paid by the shareholders.
So sole proprietorships would be eligible as far as like, because I know sole proprietorships don't have FEINs, federal ID numbers. But in that scenario, you use your social security number. So yes, those would still be eligible.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Charlie, good to see you, and thank you for the sandwiches. They really are super fabulous. If you're having a Jersey Mike's anywhere in the tri-state area, it's likely Charlie's.
Thanks, Aaron.
That's great. Well, that is all of the questions I'm seeing in the chat, and I don't believe I see any hands raised. So my suggestion is, Will, you've done so many of these calls now and really answered a lot of questions. Is there a sort of short list, again, just recapping some of the highlights or key points or questions people need to keep in mind as they apply for this in the next week?
I would say, be looking for your Form E500s or your federal Form 1065s. If you're, make sure that you have if you're a quarterly or monthly filer, know that there are instructions on the application to help you calculate those gross receipts. Because like I said, quarterly and monthly filers, their windows of filing aren't going to perfectly match up with, the defined COVID period, the pre-COVID period and the COVID period. Finally, I can't push our helpline enough. We have, last time I checked, the wait time was like less than a minute, and we've gotten all questions resolved on the first call. So if you have any questions about your forms, or if you have or if you're missing any records as far as the Form E500 or if you have any other questions, our agents will be happy to help you with that. And also, if you're not sick of me by the end of this, that we do have a presentation that covers a lot of the stuff that covers the same information on YouTube. So feel free to check that out. And also, if you have any questions for me, my contact information is on the bottom of the slide listed there.
Well, I appreciate you making that directly available to folks who've appreciated this presentation if they wanted to reach out to you directly. Let's try that 1-800 or 1-877 number first, as those are the subject matter experts. But if you're a part of another organization for which Will might be able to make a quick presentation in the next 5-6 days, you might reach out to him to check his availability. Let me ask a favor of everybody, and that is to share this with your peers. I'm running into people all the time who didn't do the PPP, didn't get an EIDL, still have or would be eligible, but didn't hear about it. So please share this information in your personal networks to your clients and customers. Let me also ask of you all, as you learn the answers to some of the questions, like if that S Corp answer, Charlie, or anybody else who's got one, if they're clear with you that S Corps are good to go, share that back with us so that we can get a clearer answer as we try to answer people's questions over this next week. Let me just do one more final call for any questions for Will Futrell.
Aaron, let me ask you a question. In your opinion, based on what you've learned about the grant program, which business owners would be foolish to not apply for this? Like if no one hears anything, what industries need to submit an application?
I mean, I would say if you file a Form E-500 or 1065, you should be submitting your application right now. That's how I'll answer that question, because while there's the hospitality grant aimed at hotels, restaurants, and accommodations and that sort, the reimbursement grant covers every other business that's filing those forms. So it's really, for us, we want to make sure everybody knows that there are two different grant programs. Just because you're not in the hospitality business doesn't mean you won't be eligible for a grant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part we need to help share the word. I've heard some people, I got a PPP, so I'm not eligible. No, if you are in NAICS 71 and 72 and you got a PPP, then you are eligible, but they're only going to cover 10% of your loss. But hey, y'all, if you're down $100,000, they're writing you a check for $10,000, and there's a $500 million fund, and it's guaranteed. If you will get some funds. If you are eligible, they will divide up the corpus that they have set aside and give you some of it. So you should absolutely, anybody in those hospitality, Josh Lowe's, I'm so sorry about how they do your sales tax, but if you are eligible, please be filing. Anybody who does sales tax, I would be encouraging them, right? Retailers and restaurants, hospitality. Do you have any word, Will, on how many applications you've received? Do you have any? Is it
over 4,000 so far?
4,000.
So our rate has been about 100 per day, but that's definitely, we've seen a big uptick in that as we're getting closer and closer to the deadline.
So if there's no other, then I want to say a thank you to our partners, the Greater Durham Chamber of Commerce, the Chatham County Chamber of Commerce. Y'all, when you as small businesses choose to pay membership dues to these organizations, you've hired us. We work for you. We want you to have high expectations of our chambers, and let us know what it is that you need. We are much better at serving you when you're super clear with what it is that you need from us at this time. Be sure to ask it of us, be bold, give us a chance to see if we can do it for you. And so I hope that you'll reach out to the team at the Durham Chamber, Cindy and her folks at the Chatham, or any of us here in Chapel Hill, if there's anything, this or otherwise, that we can be doing to help you all navigate your way through this crisis so that we can emerge successful on the other side. Well, Futrell, you're not your first rodeo, clearly. You've been giving these presentations. We are really grateful. Y'all, he was in a sweatpants and a sweatshirt just recently, put the tie on just for this. That behind him is just a pull down screen like he's at JCPenney's.
Remote working has its benefits. So
None of what I just said is true. I do think that really is a fax machine. Just in case y'all were wondering what to do with your fax machines, the answer is you can send Will a fax. But we're glad to have you with us and for your good humor at the tail end of this conversation. Everybody, thank you. Katie Lewis, you in particular. You saw this opportunity, you tracked Will down, you got us a great presentation, you invited our partners.
Thank you, Katie.
Y'all, everybody have a great day.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.